We've all seen the headlines about the Epstein case. The wealth, the power, the absolutely horrific abuse. It's dominated the news for years. But what if all those shocking revelations are actually distracting us from the real story? In this explainer, we're going to dive into a much more uncomfortable idea, that this whole scandal isn't just about a few monstrous people, but that it's actually a mirror, reflecting something broken deep inside all of us.
So that's the big question we have to ask, right? Are we just looking at some grotesque, crazy story from a safe distance? Or are we being forced to look into a mirror? One that shows us a really twisted but maybe recognizable version of our own world, and maybe even ourselves.
All right, so let's start with our reaction to all this. The whole world just seems stunned. But that brings up a pretty challenging question. Why? I mean, after everything we know about human history, why are we still so shocked when things like this happen?
I mean, just look at the sheer scale of this thing. The Department of Justice released over 3 million pages of documents. That's just staggering. And of course, the media went into a frenzy, feeding this global hunger for every single sordid detail. At some point, it stopped being just a news story, you know? It became a global spectacle.
This right here points to a really uncomfortable truth. The argument is that our public fascination, our shock, is actually a kind of dark entertainment. We treat these tragedies like a TV show, consuming every detail. It's a harsh way to look at it, but it suggests our collective outrage might not be as pure as we like to think.
So how do we even begin to explain this level of evil? Well, we usually point to the same old things. But what if we've been getting the diagnosis wrong this whole time?
Yep, here they are, the usual suspects. Money, power, sex. This is the trifecta we always blame, right? We tell ourselves, oh, it's the power that corrupted them, or it was the money that made them evil. And let's be honest, that's a comforting thought, because it makes the problem something external. It's their problem, not ours.
But we really have to ask, are these things the actual cause of the corruption, or are they just tools? Kind of like a megaphone for an evil that was already there to begin with, just waiting to be amplified.
This completely flips that old saying on its head. Think about it. It's not that power makes someone bad. It's that a person who is already corrupt on the inside gets a hold of power, and then they use it to warp and twist everything around them.
And this brings us to what's argued to be the true center of the problem, the ego self. Now, this isn't just about being arrogant. It's that fundamental, deep-down I, me, mine part of our consciousness. The argument is that this ego self is, by its very nature, exploitative. Give it nothing, and it'll exploit on a small scale. But give it a private island and a jet, and it builds an entire empire of abuse.
And this is where the diagnosis gets even more radical. The argument isn't just about a few bad individuals anymore. It's about a fundamental flaw baked into the design of our entire species.
Yeah, you heard that right. A manufacturing defect. And what is that defect? It's the ego self. It's the unique and flawed operating system that separates us human beings from pretty much every other living thing on the planet.
The difference is pretty stark when you lay it out. Animals, they run on instinct, on nature. Their behavior is predictable. But humans, we run on the ego. Now that's where all our amazing creativity comes from, but it's also the source of this cold, calculated, self-serving exploitation that you just don't see anywhere else.
And here's the real kicker. None of our systems, not our families, not our schools, not the media, none of them are designed to fix this defect. In fact, they teach us how to succeed within the ego system, not how to move beyond it. So this defect is just allowed to run wild.
So this is where the whole argument turns that mirror directly back on all of us. It takes the horror we see on some private island and says, hey, that same basic dynamic, it's playing out right now in ordinary homes all over the world.
This parallel is designed to be deeply uncomfortable. What happened on that island, the argument goes, isn't different in kind from what happens in an abusive home, it's only different in scale. The underlying principle is identical. The powerful exploit the weak. The idea is that an abuser in the home, if you gave him Epstein's money, would just go out and build his own island. Now, pushing this logic to its absolute extreme, this perspective makes a really provocative comparison. It argues that the same ego-driven principle, the exploitation of the vulnerable for your own gratification, is at the root of both abusing a child and killing an animal for food. It's a challenging idea for sure, but it claims both are acts of violence that come from the exact same human defect.
And look, this isn't just some abstract philosophy. This is a tragic reality. Statistics show us time and again that for a young girl, the most dangerous place in the world isn't a dark alley. It's often her own home, with her own family. That dynamic of exploitation is, tragically, everywhere.
So if this defect is universal, and we see it playing out everywhere, where does that leave the rest of us? Well, that brings us to the final part, the verdict on our own hypocrisy, and maybe our own complicity.
And the verdict here is blunt. It says the greatest hypocrisy isn't coming from the monsters themselves. It's coming from the outraged public, pointing fingers and pretending that we're somehow completely separate from this whole dynamic.
So how are we complicit? Well, it's a pretty simple three-step cycle. First, as a society, we worship money and power. We put these people on pedestals. Second, our worship is the very thing that gives them their power. And then third, we act all shocked and surprised when they use that power to act on the same selfish impulses that we all have, just without any limits. We basically create the monsters, and then we condemn them for being monstrous.
This example is just devastatingly simple, isn't it? It shows how our moral outrage often has a price tag. It lasts right up until our own self-interest gets involved. A 10% raise, and suddenly we're willing to be part of the very system we were just complaining about.
Because let's be real, the outrage is always temporary. Once the headlines fade, the cycle just continues. We'll vote for them again. We'll buy their stuff again. We'll invite them to speak at our schools again. Why? Because either we forget or we hope some of that power might benefit us.
And so, this whole thing leaves us with one final, haunting question. In a world that's built on the shared human defect, where we're the ones who give these people their power, and then we act all shocked at what they do with it, who is the real criminal? The few who act on their worst impulses without any limits? Or the billions of us who built the world that let them do it?